Hello, good afternoon and welcome to this Vox, this discussion on wildlife conservation and local communities. I'm Rob York, independent moderator and facilitator of environmental dialogue and discussions. We're going to have a very broad-ranging discussion, but first of all, very briefly, if the panellists could just introduce themselves, starting with the Minister, in 30 seconds.
My name is Poamba Shfeta from Namibia and a minister responsible for environment, forestry and tourism.
Thank you.
My name's Dilys Rowe. I'm the chair of the IUCN Sustainable Use and Livelihoods Specialist Group.
My name is Álvaro Amaro. I am member of European Parliament and I am the president of the intergroup, the Biodiversity, Hunting and Countryside.
And host. I'm Ali Kaka. I'm IUCN Regional Councillor for Africa for the last 8 years.
Would you like to just say a few words about your journey here, maybe today?
I came here to interact with European Union, members of Parliament, just to have a talk on wildlife conservation in Africa, particularly Southern Africa.
Right, right. What's the kind of population split? How many people live in rural areas? Do you know very roughly the percentage between urban and rural? Is it around 48?
Yeah, I can say that in rural areas, the majority of our people live in rural areas. Right. More than 60% live in rural areas.
Okay.
And that is where the much populated area, much populated of our people, especially in the northern part and northeast, and also the population of wildlife mostly occur there.
Right. Okay. Ali, can I sorry, if you could just introduce yourself. Are we talking about all of Africa? Because this discussion is about hearing voices from Africa. So we've got the minister from Namibia. What about the rest of it's a huge area and we've got lots of different countries. Any views, or do you want to introduce yourself and just say something about other parts of Africa in that aspect?
Thanks,
about
Rob.
where the populations are.
Thanks, Rob. I'm the IUCN Regional Councillor for Africa. This is my second term. And I was elected by the entire union of IUCN, not just Africa. But my main area of jurisdiction, basically, on behalf of IUCN, is Africa as a whole. And I think it's important for everyone to understand that wildlife across the entire continent, with the exception of very few countries, is a mainstay for not just the country but also the people. And those are the facts on the ground.
Yes. And when you say the mainstay, you're saying that the populations are living alongside the wildlife?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
we're hearing that the majority of the population in Namibia, but other parts of Africa, they are living alongside the wildlife?
Yes, like the minister said, 60%, in some cases it goes beyond that, 70 to 80% live with wildlife on a day-to-day basis, depend on wildlife on a day-to-day basis.
Right. Maybe on that point, Dilys, if we could bring you in, if you could just introduce yourself, because I think there's a relationship between livelihoods and interacting with the wildlife. Is that?
That's right, yes.
We can obviously explore this for further.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. My name's Dilys Rowe. I'm the chair of the IUCN Sustainable Use and Livelihoods Specialist Group. And yes, it's very true in all parts of the world, but in Africa particularly, more wildlife lives outside of national parks than inside it. So it's there living on community land and on private land. And quite often this wildlife presents a huge cost to the people that live alongside it. You know, you're talking about dangerous creatures which we wouldn't want in our backyards in the UK or in Europe. And so there has to be communities on your side if you want to be successful at conserving that wildlife. They have to support the conservation effort. They have to have a stake in it in order to be willing stewards of that wildlife and, you know, and frankly to put up with creatures that may kill them, may kill their livestock, may trample their crops and destroy their livelihoods.
Right. Do you think, okay, so kind of right at the start, is there a problem with even framing this discussion? For example, in the UK, there's an organisation which was started about animal welfare. I think it was it was about 100 years ago, and it was protecting animal welfare, which is not the same as wildlife conservation. Can we just pick that apart at this early stage? We're talking about wildlife conservation and communities, not necessarily animal welfare, which is the protection of livestock. Or am I being too pedantic too early on? Does someone want to come in on that?
The main difference is conservation. The practice of conservation is essentially focused on the survival of species.
Right.
So the commission in which my specialist group sits in IUCN is the Species Survival Commission, and it does what it says on its label. It tries to ensure the survival of species. Animal welfare is a very important subject and not something that we should be at all dismissive about, but has a stronger concern with the welfare of individual animals, whether they're wild animals or livestock. So I think that's the main difference at the practice of conservation biology. Ali may or may not agree with me, but it is focused on at a species level as opposed to at an individual animal level.
No, absolutely right, Dilys and Rob. And I think there is a great misunderstanding. And that's why I think we are here. There is this misunderstanding between protectionism of wildlife, which is something very relevant in the European context, where you're looking at mostly individual animals and how you can safeguard them, and that's where the animal welfare thing was born from. Whereas in Africa, it's different. We believe in conservation, absolutely, but then there's a question of use of that wildlife as well, which we think is our right to use the wildlife, but we also conserve. But we don't sort of protect them and say, no, you're just like a bunny, you cannot touch them at all. That's the difference that we have.
I want to come on to that you have a right to use wildlife, because I think that's quite an interesting area. I want to come back. Let's just keep going. So we've got time to broaden this. So that's the purpose of this dialogue, is to broaden some of the items that we're going to be talking about. And back to the Minister, and I will be bringing you in, obviously, at some point.
If I can present.
But in a minute, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think that's...
Yeah, that would be coming.
That's important also.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But I represent you.
Exactly, yeah.
I think also.
Yeah. And I will be asking you.
Okay, that's okay.
Your questions.
I assisted for our conversation.
Yeah.
I like so much.
Good, good. So the Minister, there's a big conference coming up later this year, all about biodiversity, COP15. Is Namibia going to be there? Because you're holding a huge amount, or you are stewards of a huge amount of wildlife. Are you going to COP15 in China, I believe it is, isn't it? It's in China later this year.
Yes. I will be there. I will be there, of course. Namibia will be represented. If I'm not there, Namibia will be represented at higher level. And also for the CITES, I will be there in November, the 19th Conference of the Parties. But these are very important platforms for Namibia, and also the UNCCD. These are very, very important for us. Those Conference of Parties for these conventions are very important to us. Yeah. Now, on this matter, we are talking about conservation of wildlife. And in African context, when you talk about wildlife conservation, we talk of this animal roaming wild. They are not in zoos, they are wild. And they live side by side with those communities who are there. Now, I give an example for Namibia. What practical example is that during the arrival of the colonizers, this wildlife had been there, living in these communities. And the communities know, even traditional leaders, they know what time is for hunting. People don't just wake up and go and hunt. That is now prior to the genesis of colonialism in Africa. That is what happened. Now, they know what time to hunt, when, and it's given by the community leaders that this is a hunting time. And they are authorized, and what type of animals they have to hunt. But animals were plenty, more than now we have. Of course, human population also many is that we have now, and they had habitat, enough habitat. Not like now we lost so much habitat of this wildlife. For those countries, for those of us who are range states of these animals like elephants, rhinos, and lions, these are animals that are very destructive. Buffaloes. If you have to imagine that I have to bring 2 pair of elephants, 2 pair of lions, just in your farm of 2,000 hectares, and you leave it, I leave it there. I just leave these 3 pairs. I leave them there for you. You will call me after 2 days. Come and collect this. Now imagine those who live there for those years. When colonial came, what happens that they take away the conservation from the hands of these communities, and they made these animals as only benefiting one side. In Namibia, for instance, we have 2 divisions of land. We have a communal land that is for everybody, for communal people, for everybody, for communities. Then you have commercial land that is owned by private people. Like you have a land that you buy, and that is your own land. Now, these animals, the benefits will only accrue to the commercial communities. That means private people who own commercial land. Communities, they never had, they were not allowed to conserve, they were not even allowed to benefit from them. What happened? The community started retaliating because these animals are destroying their properties. They kill them. And because they did not have any, they did not regard them as an asset. Now, after independence, what we have done is that we have to make sure, because they were extinct, most of them were eradicated in most of communities. Animals were hunted as meat. No one even cared about this because they were prevented to make use of them. So they almost extinct in all those communities. So we had to introduce another law to give both commercial and the communal communities to accrue benefits from this and to have income and to give these incentives. Because of that incentives, now we have more animals after independence. Just in a very less than 30 years, population of elephants jumped from 5,000 to more than 25,000, 24,000. Populate almost everybody. And this is occurrence of this population of wild animals has tremendously grown to a point where it never happened in 100 years. So that means these communities embrace now conservation because they benefit from it. They regard them as asset. Even if they destroy their properties, even loss of lives. Almost every day you have destruction, incidents of human-wildlife conflict. But these communities, they regard these animals as theirs because they benefit from it.
So you're talking, yes, so we're talking about hunting, and that is a tool that communities can use in order to harvest, in order to manage their wildlife. So this is about wildlife management.
Yeah, you know, hunting or utilization of wildlife, whether consumptive or non-consumptive, comes later. First is wildlife in those communities, because we have conservancies, community conservancies, created by the law. And in those community conservancies, we have about 86 community conservancies. And that constitute 20% of our land mass. Namibia is a huge land. It's talking about more than 600,000 square kilometers. And those communities manage their own wildlife there. We believe in Namibia, and that's the model we have. And that's why Namibia is acclaimed to be a successful country in wildlife conservation, because we believe that we cannot be successful in conservation of wild animals that are roaming without the community's involvement and the community benefits from that.
Right.
You won't succeed. And that we have an example from the colonial era. That community started abandoning conservation because during the arrivals of colonizers, they started to take away this benefit. So, and they retaliated. So, and we do this, when we utilize these wild animals, it is anchored in our constitution, our basic law, because our basic constitution talks about we have to maintain our biodiversity, our ecosystem, and ecological processes. And we have to use our natural resources sustainably. That's why when we use these natural resources, we do it with the principle of sustainability and the application of science. We do game counting every year in every region.
Do you think, Alvaro, do you think that Europeans have heard what the minister has been saying? Have they heard these thoughts directly before from Africa about managing wildlife?
Okay, first I want to speak in my language, but first I can speak in English because I think that I am Portuguese and I am European Parliament. I am member of the European Parliament, and it's honor for me because in this moment, in the beginning of this mandate, I was elected the president of Intergroup Biodiversity, Hunting and Countryside. And it's in this quality that I was here, I think, in the organization of this meeting. It's a very important meeting to discuss the problems of and the different realities in the Europe, as you said, and the minister, and in Africa. We have some differences naturally, and difference to look for the conservation, and I like so much the conservation, but I am with passion a hunter, and it's possible. And in my country and in other countries in Europe, my speech is like this: okay, we can defend the conservation, but the conservation is not against to the possibility to hunters. In Africa, naturally, in Europe, but it's not easy. Many times it's difficult to speak something like this with the science.
Yeah.
The position is with the science, I think, because...
With the science, you say, yeah.
Yes, the science, yes.
But can I just interrupt? Do you think it depends on the hunting? Is it well-regulated, sustainable hunting? And that applies to the UK, across Europe, maybe Norway or other parts of Europe. Just saying that hunting is in tune with conservation is open to scrutiny, more scrutiny than ever before.
Okay, we can discuss naturally, but I think that with the discussion we can decide, and we can decide with the local communities, as the minister said, and that said very well, and the realities of the different countries and continents, and to the hunters are people that want to hunt naturally, but only to not only to speak about the conservation and with the responsibility, because the animals, it's important for the economy, local rural economy.
In Europe and in Africa?
Yes, of course.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Yes, of course.
Hunting with responsibility, I like that phrase.
Yes, hunting with responsibility, okay. Yes.
Yeah.
But I think that it's the word of the hunters, and it's important in Europe and in Africa. I think it's my opinion.
Yeah.
Without responsibility, okay, it's not hunting, then it's not.
That's a very important point, and I think it's a bit insulting, because the insinuation of these bans of wildlife that exists in Africa is basically saying that Africans are not responsible enough to look after the wildlife.
So these are bans
Ministers
now-
say that.
Yeah, but-
Conservation was there way before.
Yes, yes.
What are we talking about? We're talking about countries in Western Europe banning the import of animal parts
Yes. Or
Wildlife
even
trade.
hunting
from...
in Africa.
Well, no, because they're not trying to tell people not to hunt. They're just banning the import,
No.
which effectively might change hunting in the country where the animals are
Yes.
and drive it somewhere else.
Yeah. Now, yes, maybe just to talk on this matter, because that is also the one thing that people are trying to put forward. That now we are not saying don't hunt, but we are in a partnership. If we trade with you and you decide literally that I'm no longer trading, what do you mean? What do you mean there? You want to say stop that trade because I'm no longer allow any import from you, and we are at that equal partnership, trading, and you literally decided that. Now, on this matter now, when you say you ban hunting, and you put not only ends there, you also put restrictions and prohibitions that your airlines, facilities, or anything cannot be used for, or even kind of any import, any of these trophies in transit does not pass in EU. Now, if you put that restriction, definitely you meant to say that should stop.
Yeah.
So it is an interference. So, and now on this case,
But you will find another
yeah.
market. You will go maybe to the Russians or maybe to Asia, and you will find other markets who are not so interested in welfare. They just want to have the trophies. So that is a danger.
You know what regulates what governs our relations on international trade of endangered species? It's the CITES. And that convention, if we ignore that convention, if we ignore the international law, and we now put our own domestic laws and the policies on other countries, and this supersede then the international law, then you are making a mistake. Yeah. Let's allow convention of the CITES. That's a convention on international trade of in endangered species. Let it govern. If CITES feels that it's okay for Namibia to sell or to do this, it is okay, and we regulate that. We go to a convention and a conference of the parties, and we discuss and agree on matters. Now, what happens that when people feel they are not, convinced about the decision of the CITES, they come and do their own laws, domestic laws, and those domestic laws affect directly other countries, other member states. And if you can just agree to say, let's allow everything to be regulated at that platform. We have CITES as a platform.
So what you're saying, sorry to interrupt, but you're saying that some countries, especially in Europe maybe, and America, are putting in higher regulations than CITES. Now, I think we've got the Director General of CITES joining us at some point, so maybe we can explore this a little bit further. But this is about conservation of wildlife. Dilys, do you think people are wanting to conflate this with animal rights and animal welfare in order to bring in these higher regulations than CITES already has? So they're ignoring the international standards in order to put higher regulation in, which is going to then have unforeseen results on wildlife.
I think it is driven by an animal welfare agenda. There's certainly no argument from a conservation science perspective for putting restrictions on hunting if it's well regulated and other forms of use. It's clear that everybody can point to examples where things have gone wrong and animals have been killed that shouldn't have been, or rogue hunters have exceeded quotas and populations are being affected. But overall, if you look at the IUCN Red List, which is the global authority on the conservation status of species, hunting is not listed as a major threat to any of the species that are subject to trophy hunting. And actually, conversely, the major threats that species are facing are habitat loss, human-wildlife conflict, and loss of prey and poaching. And actually, hunting can do a lot to mitigate a lot of those other threats. So not only is it not a threat in itself, but it can actually help address some of those other major conservation threats.
That's the end of the session for the discussion. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Alvaro, for hosting this discussion, and all the panellists here and to the Minister. Thank you again, and thank you for watching. Goodbye.